All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking what's essentially a hidden cardiac time bomb. We're talking about a condition that hides in plain sight, mimicking common ailments, but carrying the potential for some truly catastrophic consequences. We're exploring myocarditis. And whether you're gearing up for the NCLEX or just stepping onto a cardiac floor for your next shift, mastering this topic isn't just about passing a test. It's about catching this hidden threat before it actually goes off. 20%. Just think about that for a second. Up to 20% of sudden cardiac deaths in young adults under the age of 35 are caused by myocarditis. Let that really sink in. We are not talking about older adults with decades of plaque buildup here. We're talking about young, seemingly healthy individuals, athletes, college students, people completely in the prime of their lives who just suddenly collapse. Understanding exactly how and why this happens is our mission today. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to cover the inflamed heart muscle, spotting the clinical signs, diagnosing the damage, critical nursing priorities, managing high-risk medications, and finally, preventing fatal complications. Let's get to it. Part 1. The inflamed heart muscle. Because we really have to understand the enemy before we can defeat it. The root words kind of tell the whole story here, right? Myo equals muscle. So myocarditis is simply inflammation of the myocardium, the actual working, pumping muscle of the heart. This is distinctly different from pericarditis, which affects the sac around the heart, or endocarditis, which is the inner lining and the valves. And the most common culprit? A viral infection, specifically Coxsackie virus B. Typically, you'll see a patient come in with a history of a standard upper respiratory or GI viral illness about 1 to 2 weeks prior. They thought they were totally over the flu, but the virus had other plans. So how does this microscopic invasion actually play out? Well, first, the virus enters the cardiomyocytes, the heart muscle cells. Second, it causes direct cytotoxic damage. The viral particles literally lyse or burst open the cells, causing cell death and dumping all that troponin straight into the bloodstream. Third, your own immune system rushes in. T lymphocytes and macrophages infiltrate the muscle, releasing inflammatory cytokines that cause profound tissue edema and necrosis. And finally, because the muscle is swollen, stiff, and literally dying, the heart loses its ability to pump. This leads to a massive drop in cardiac output, a drastically reduced ejection fraction, and a highly irritable electrical system that's incredibly prone to lethal arrhythmias. Moving on to Section 2, spotting the clinical signs right at the bedside. Now put yourself in the shoes of the nurse assessing a newly admitted patient. Board exams absolutely love to test this exact distinction, and this brilliantly illustrates the difference based on chest pain alone. In myocarditis, the pain can be dull, a pressure sensation, or even sharp. But the absolute crucial point is that it is not consistently positional. It doesn't change much when they move around. Contrast that with acute pericarditis, where the pain is sharp, pleuritic, and notably feels so much better when the patient sits up and leans forward. Let's put on our clinical detective hats for a second. How do we definitively rule out a standard heart attack or acute pericarditis? First up, troponin. In myocarditis, troponin is significantly elevated because the muscle cells are actively dying, just like in a STEMI. But in pericarditis, it's usually normal or just mildly elevated. Next, grab your stethoscope and listen to the chest. A pericardial friction rub is the classic hallmark of pericarditis, but it is entirely absent in isolated myocarditis. Finally, look at the ECG. A STEMI shows localized ST elevation matching a blocked artery. Myocarditis? That shows diffuse ST changes across the board. So high troponin plus no friction rub plus diffuse ECG changes, you should be immediately suspecting myocarditis. All right, Section 3, diagnosing the damage. It's time to confirm our suspicions with definitive testing. Now, an echo is fantastic for checking out a reduced ejection fraction, and an ECG is definitely going to show us the arrhythmias. But the absolute definitive gold standard for non-invasive diagnosis, that is the cardiac MRI. It's the only test we have that can look directly at the tissue characterization of the heart muscle without actually taking a physical biopsy. When the radiologist is looking at that MRI, they're using something called the Lake Louise criteria. They are essentially hunting for 3 specific things: edema on T2 weighted imaging, diffuse injury on T1 mapping, and crucially, late gadolinium enhancement, or LGE. This LGE shows fibrosis and scarring in a non-ischemic pattern, meaning the scar doesn't follow the path of a blocked coronary artery. This non-ischemic pattern is the smoking gun here, folks. It proves the damage came from widespread inflammation, not a localized heart attack. Which brings us to Section 4, critical nursing priorities. And as the nurse, your priority is life or death right here. Listen closely to this one because it's a massive red flag. You absolutely must enforce absolute activity restriction. This is not just a nice-to-have guideline for patient comfort, it is a strict life safety measure. During active inflammation, the heart muscle is profoundly, dangerously electrically unstable. Any physical exertion dramatically increases myocardial oxygen demand and can instantly trigger fatal ventricular fibrillation. Literally, just walking to the bathroom can be deadly in severe cases. They absolutely must stay in bed.
Because these patients can go from looking okay to full-blown cardiogenic shock in a matter of hours. Certain assessments are non-negotiable. They need continuous 12-lead telemetry monitoring because arrhythmias are the primary cause of sudden death here. You must know exactly where the emergency crash cart is. Monitor blood pressure closely. Tachycardia combined with hypotension is an early warning sign of cardiogenic shock. And make sure to auscultate for an S3 gallop, which tells you the left ventricle is failing and fluid is backing up.
Section 5. Managing high-risk medications. While we definitely want to support the heart failure, giving the wrong medication in myocarditis can be instantly fatal. We need to be incredibly careful with heart failure meds here. You do want to use ACE inhibitors to reduce afterload, but start them at a very low dose once the patient is stable. You do use diuretics to clear pulmonary congestion, but you've got to monitor their potassium like a hawk because hypokalemia in an inflamed heart triggers arrhythmias. However, you absolutely must avoid NSAIDs entirely. Do not give ibuprofen or naproxen, even if they're complaining of chest pain. NSAIDs worsen sodium and fluid retention and actually increase mortality in heart failure.
And here is another severe red flag protocol. Withhold beta blockers in acute or fulminant myocarditis. Beta blockers are negative inotropes. They actively decrease the force of the heart's contraction. If you give a negative inotrope to a patient who already has a severely reduced ejection fraction from acute inflammation, you will tip them straight into complete hemodynamic collapse. You only introduce beta blockers much, much later when the patient is completely stable and euvolemic. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the underlying cause completely shifts our treatment strategy. For example, if the myocarditis is caused by Lyme disease, known as Lyme carditis, it frequently causes complete heart block. But incredibly, this is fully reversible if you treat it promptly with IV antibiotics like doxycycline. On the flip side, a rare autoimmune variant called giant cell myocarditis requires massive doses of immunosuppressive corticosteroids. And for Chagas disease, which is actually the most common cause worldwide, we use specific antiparasitic medications.
Finally, Section 6, Preventing Fatal Complications. We're looking at the long-term endgame now and how we protect our patients moving forward.
Okay, you might find this as incredibly surprising as I did. It's known as the fulminant paradox. Patients who present with fulminant myocarditis, meaning sudden, catastrophic, rapid onset cardiogenic shock that requires massive mechanical support like ECMO, often have better long-term cardiac recovery than patients who present with milder, chronic myocarditis. If we can act fast, bridge them with mechanical support, and essentially keep them alive through that terrifying acute phase, their heart muscle can very often completely heal. So, picture this. Your patient is a 20-year-old college athlete. They survive the acute phase, they feel fine. They want to know, when is it actually safe to return to the field? This is arguably the most critical patient education point you will ever deliver on this topic.
The timeline here is incredibly strict. Day 1 of recovery only starts when they have complete resolution of symptoms and their troponin levels are totally 100% normal. From that exact point, there is a minimum mandatory period of 3 to 6 months of absolute restriction from strenuous activity. They can't just go by how they feel. Before any exertion is allowed, internal healing must be confirmed by a cardiologist. Final clearance requires a completely normal repeat cardiac MRI to ensure there's no lingering inflammation or dangerous scarring, plus a totally normal exercise stress test.
We've just seen how a completely normal, everyday virus can turn into a lethal cardiac threat. So I'm going to leave you with this scenario. If a young, otherwise healthy patient comes onto your unit after fainting and casually mentions they had a simple viral illness a couple of weeks ago, will you connect the dots? Will you catch that hidden time bomb, enforce activity restriction, and potentially save their life before they exert themselves? Keep these clinical clues in mind, trust your vigilance, and you just might. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.